those elbows high. What am I on about? Why do you even want high elbows? Well, we're talking about swimming technique here, so hopefully that gives you a bit more context. Now, trying to have a high elbow during the pull phase of your swimming front crawl stroke is the goal, and we're going to be helping you nail it. We're focusing on under the water, not over the water. And it's actually the part of the stroke that you don't see that is far more important than the recovery aspect when you see the arms moving over. And as you've probably realized, we are focusing on the elbow. So what exactly is high elbow? Well, in basic terms, it is keeping this part of your body, your elbow, higher than your hand throughout that underwater pull phase. And it has been thought in the past that having your elbows high to the surface of the water, the better. But that isn't necessarily true for various reasons. If you're trying to force that to be that high, it can actually put undue stress on your shoulders. And for many of us, it's just physically impossible due to the lack of flexibility that we have. And as a result, it could end up having a negative effect on your overall stroke if you try and force it. So back to what does high elbow actually look like, and how do you know if you're even getting close to this gold standard in swimming? Well, let's imagine we're looking at your stroke and your body position side on. We want to draw a line that goes from your shoulder to your hand and see that your elbow is in front or above that line. If your elbow is on that line or behind or below it, then it means you're dropping your elbow, and therefore you're going to be losing a lot of that potential power for your stroke. In theory, the higher the elbow or the further in front and above this imaginary line, the better. But that is only the case if you've got that strength and that flexibility in your shoulder to be able to not just get into that position once, but repeatedly do it on every single stroke. Now, in reality, there are very few swimmers who can reach this textbook ideal of that high elbow. So see it more as something to aim for, and basically anything that has your elbow above that line or in front of that line is going to be a bonus. If you don't have the luxury of access to underwater filming or being able to have a freeze frame of your swim stroke, you probably want some cues that will help you to actually realize and visualize where your elbow is in the water. So we're focusing purely on the elbow joint for this bit. I just want you to join me on this and hold your hands out in front of you with your palms facing towards the ceiling. And now notice where your elbow is. Your elbow joint, the pointy bit, is going to be pointing down towards the ground. Now I want you to turn your palms over so that they're in the position as though you were swimming. So imagine you were at the start of the pull stroke. You'll notice that your elbow has rotated to the outside, so it's gone from pointing downwards to pointing to the outside. Now from here, I want you to actually just go through the swim stroke with your elbow still pointing out. And that you will find will naturally help your elbow to stay high throughout the stroke. So that's just a visual point to think about. Your hand position will automatically actually help your elbow. We've got a couple of useful cues to think about when you're visualizing that high elbow pull. So picture your elbow as a hinge. As your hand enters the water at the start of the stroke, you can allow your whole arm to drop below the surface, but make sure that your elbow doesn't enter the water any lower than your shoulder. And then you want to think about hinging from the elbow. So you're going to drop your hand in your forearm, but try and keep the upper arm as parallel to the surface as you can comfortably do so. And maintaining your shoulder relatively high as you go through the stroke is going to help with this elbow position, because if you're over-rotating, you're going to be dropping your shoulder really low, and then you will automatically find it really hard to keep your elbow in that position. And finally, just as a more of a visual cue, think about your elbow as that hinge again, but imagine the forearm. You want to get your forearm and your hand as close to vertical as possible, because if you think, if it's horizontal or parallel to the bottom of the pool and you're trying to pull, you've got no surface area in which to propel yourself forwards. But the closer you can get it to facing the back of the pool, the more and the larger the area is for pushing and propelling yourself through the stroke. So that's the what and the how explained, but still you're probably wondering about the why. Well, I've just touched on it there. Basically, the steeper that angle and the larger you can have this part of your hand here, the more area you've got for propelling yourself forwards, and the more efficient your stroke is going to be. Us standing here explaining how to achieve that elusive high elbow is one thing, but even with the best visualization and feedback you can get from any external sources, it's still going to be really hard to just suddenly implement this into your technique. So it's time to break the stroke down and make it sort of happen more naturally in manageable chunks. So we're going to be using some drills and aids to help you achieve this. Let's begin on Dryland with some stretch cords. And this is a perfect translation from visualization into a movement before you get into the water. So you're going to be replicating the pull phase of the stroke with that little bit of resistance from the stretch cord, which will really replicate the feeling you'll get when you do get into the water. So find something to attach the stretch cords to that's around waist height, and then wrap them around your palms, and you can repeat the action of the full pull phase, and then you can isolate from the catch to the mid pull, just doing that small hinging action, thinking of hinging at the elbow, and then you can repeat it with double arm or single arm. Right, into the water now, and it's time to break the stroke right down with sculling. This is great for isolating that small movement, and the focus is going to be mainly on mid-scull, but we'll do some front scull as well. And for this, you just want to either have a pull buoy between your legs or some fins, whichever you find easiest for keeping your body position nice and neutral. So for front scull, you want your arms out in front of you with a slight bend in the elbow, and your hands are going to make that mound in front of you, so you're moving them side to side. And then the mid-scull, where the main focus is. This is where we want to see that high elbow. So the elbow is pointing out to the side of the pool. Your fingers are going to be pointing towards the bottom of the pool. And imagine your elbow as the hinge and your forearms as pendulums. So you're going to allow your hands to sweep from side to side, trying to keep your upper arm as still as possible. A slight progression on from sculling, but still a very isolated movement. You're going to be moving your arm in a backwards direction with a small amount of propulsion. But because there's very little propulsion, ideally you want to have fins on for this. And I would recommend actually using a kickboard, so you're going to focus purely on one arm. So the other arm's extended out in front of you. And start with the arm that's in the water extended, and you're pulling back to just being in line with your shoulder. Basically, the catch phase with that elbow hinge. So stop once your hand reaches the point where it's in line with your shoulder, and simply return to the front of your stroke. And repeat this small movement for the whole length before swapping arms. Now, if you have a set of hand paddles, this can be a fun drill that can help emphasize the high elbow. So instead of putting your hand through the straps, you're simply going to grab over the top of the paddle with your hands like this, and that will basically help keep your wrist straight because you can't really bend it as it's going over that. And naturally, that's going to help emphasize the high elbow, because you'll find if you don't keep it, you won't be able to get an efficient pull, but also you'll struggle to hold on to the paddle. We're progressing here. It's time for doggy paddle. But first up, we're going to do the shorter version where you reach at the front, but you only bring your pull back to your shoulders. So you're still emphasizing this first part of the catch and into the pull. And once you've done a couple of lengths of that, then I want you to do the longer version where you pull all the way back to your hip. So you're doing that full recovery, but still with an underwater recovery. We're getting close to putting the full stroke back together now. Finally, it's about timing. And to work on this, we're going to use the catch-up drill, which is effectively doing one full arm cycle with a pause after each stroke. For each underwater pull phase, I want you to think of starting slowly and speeding up the arm as it reaches your shoulder and then transfers into the push at the back part of the stroke. The front of the stroke, the skull, leading into the main propulsion phase, doesn't need to be fast. It's about catching that water so you've got the resistance to push against. As the larger, more powerful muscles engage throughout the pull, and that's where you can speed up the push at the end. That is high elbow for you. Now you know the what and the why. It's time to go and work on the how. Good luck. Give us a like if you've enjoyed it. And remember, you can still click on that globe and subscribe if you've not yet done so.